All right, so for our first presenter today, we have Jean-Marc Lefebvre. He is from Transport Quebec, from the Direction de l'économie, de la prospective et des stratégies. And he's going to be presenting to us today, Transporting Quebec Towards Modernity, Sustainable Mobility Policy 2030. So please join me in welcoming Jean-Marc.
Bonjour.
I need to make you a presenter, Jean-Marc, before you can share your screen. All right, so you should be able to see that now.
We're just getting there.
Yeah, no worries. Perfect. Your screens look nice. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you to having me today, and bonjour. As Nathalie said, I'm Jean-Marc Lefebvre. I'm the directeur de l'économie, de la prospective et des stratégies à la Direction générale de la politique de mobilité durable et de l'électrification at Transport Québec. First of all, I would like to apologize a bit. My English is not what it used to be, so if I do sound awkward, please forgive me. It's not intended. And I'd like to thank the Canadian Institute of Transportation Engineers for inviting us to present Quebec's Sustainable Mobility Policy. This is a wide policy that covers a lot of aspects, but I'm sure it will be a crucial lever to contribute to improve Quebec transportation system. Sorry, I've got pop-up. The policy was launched in April 2018 with the clear objective to position Quebec as a North American leader in sustainable and integrated mobility by 2030. The policy came with a first 5-year action plan, which covered the period from 2018 to 2023. At the policy launch in 2018, it represented investment of more than $9.7 billion, including $2.9 billion in new investment. So that was a big piece of policy. It was developed and elaborated in a particular context. It was timely, not only because we needed to act on some challenge, but also because it allowed us to take advantage of the change that was currently taking place in transportation with recent development, particularly in telecommunication and technological innovation, intelligent transport system, autonomous and connected vehicle, and the emergence of new business models such as mobility as a service. The policy will allow us to give answer to social, economic, and environmental imperative as the population is more and more aware of those challenges. This is the first time in Quebec history that the transportation policy is integrated and comprehensive. It covers all modes of transportation for both people and goods and covers all of Quebec region, including Montreal metropolitan area, Quebec City metropolitan area, and the more rural and remote area of Quebec. The policy has been very well received by all our partners. The concerted approach we use for the policy development, which involved the contribution of an advisory committee consisting of representatives from around 20 organizations covering most fields of expertise regarding sustainable mobility in Quebec, the consultation of several organizations on a bilateral basis, and 2 formal exchange meetings, which brought the participation of about 100 or so organizations, were certainly major factor explaining the policy success and its wide endorsement by all the partners. The following diagram presents the concept upon which the policy is based. The policy places the citizen and the businesses at the center of the government concern, where mobility issues are approached from an ecosystemic perspective and in which the various components are interrelated and connected, while influencing each other to move toward a more sustainable mobility. As you see, the users, so the citizen and the businesses, are at the heart of the ecosystem and adapt transportation behaviors to meet their needs according to their culture of mobility. Those citizens and businesses use multiple and integrated transportation services to move efficiently within the ecosystem. These services are part of a reliable and high-performance multimodal transportation system, which is the foundation on which services are provided, using well-maintained infrastructure organized to provide the most efficient transportation service offer. These systems operate within a territorial organization that fosters sustainable mobility and contribute to the deployment of a multimodal system and services in which in turn lead to a coherent, sustainable development of the territory. There are two crucial catalysts which drive the ecosystem, which is governance and funding. One must allow to break down the barrier between the different components of the ecosystem so that they interact with each other and the other. Funding is a driving force behind a move toward a more sustainable ecosystem. Last, innovation is everywhere, both in the field of technology and in the way of doing things, and is a key factor of transformation that influences all components. The policy vision is to make Quebec a North American leader in sustainable mobility by 2030. The goal is to provide Quebec with a high-performance, safe, connected, and low-carbon transportation ecosystem. Lastly, transportation should contribute to Quebec prosperity and meet the needs of both citizens and businesses. In order to realize the concept and theoretical approach, the policy was planned with the first 5-year global action plan covering the period 2018 to 2023. The action plan is completed by 11 comprehensive sectorial intervention framework, which regroup measure and action specific to a mode or a sector. Each of those frameworks present the challenge facing the sector and contain their own action plan for the same time frame. As a governmental policy, the sustainable mobility policy rely on other ministries as partners, which have all a role to play in terms of mobility. These partner ministries also have measures that are included in the first action plan. This includes economy, environment, energy and natural resources, municipal affairs, just to name a few. The 11 intervention framework I mentioned earlier are a key element of the sustainable mobility policy and are an essential part of the effort needed to attain the objective. There are 11 of them, and as you can see, it covers a wide scope of transportation sector, including marine and air transport, active transportation, paratransit, or intelligent transport system. In total, the action plan and the intervention framework encompass more than 180 measures for the 2018-2023 5-year period. It's a lot. To guide our approach and to ensure that we achieve our sustainable mobility objective, the policy proposed 10 global targets, which cover the 3 spheres of sustainable development: social, environmental, and economic. The first 3 targets cater to the social dimension of sustainable mobility that should, above all, serve citizens and their needs. It aims to give them a choice of different sustainable transport solutions. Cycling or driving to a well-performing public transit system are examples. The policy aim is that 70% of the population has access to at least 4 sustainable mobility services, such as car or bike sharing, public transport, access to active transportation infrastructure, etc. It also seeks to reduce transit time in order to improve their quality of life, so a reduction of 20% in average commute time between work and home is targeted, whether by improved transportation solutions such as faster public transport or a reduction of congestion. It also aims to reduce the number of fatalities and serious injuries by 25%. The ongoing work toward the adoption of a Vision Zero approach by the ministry should contribute to achieve this objective. Main action we're working on. To reach this target, several measures have been implemented or will be. I won't go into detail about them all, but I can say that the main improvement include in public transit for urban center, the objective is to increase the offer. One of the ways to achieve this is by improving public transit assistance funding program. The main initial goal was a raise of 5% per year until 2030, but this will have to be reviewed considering the impact brought by the pandemic. So we aim to increase the offer of transit by 5% every year until 2030. That was the initial aim regarding this element. Active transportation is also an important part of the policy, not only because it allows for sustainable travel, but it also had a significant impact on public health. The specific need of pedestrians and cyclists must be taken into account in order to develop urban environments that are conducive to walking and cycling and to facilitate their access. Several measures in the policy affect active transportation. The Route Verte is an important asset in Quebec with its 5,300 kilometers and is the North America's longest network of bicycle trail. The possibility of developing bike sharing services such as Bixi in Montreal and more recently Avelo in Quebec City, which offer e-bike sharing services, is a very interesting way to moving forward. Mobility as a services and on-demand transport are paving the way for a series of new services that will be major component of the 2030 mobility. The action plan includes pilot project which will contribute to publicize new form of mobility. Mobility as a service, on-demand transport, and shared mobility projects are also fostered and encouraged. A lower carbon footprint mobility. I think in 2021 it's hard to pass on that one. It's a major element of the policy. It's the second series of targets that aim at the environmental aspect of sustainable mobility. These are very important since they support the achievement of certain targets set by Quebec government in its Energy Policy 2030, which is to reduce by 40% the quantity of petroleum product consumed by all sectors. And in the 2030 plan for green economy that replaced the previous climate change action plan, Quebec government kept its ambitious target to reduce overall GHG emission by 37.5% below the 1990 level by 2030. In Quebec, the transportation sector is the largest emitter of GHG. In 2018, which is the latest data available, it represented 44.8% of Quebec emissions. Road transportation alone account for 79.6% of transportation sector emission or 35.6% of total GHG emission. Solo car is one of the targets is to reduce by 20% the number of trips made by solo car and to replace them with trips by carpooling, public transit, active transportation, or other form of mobility. This should contribute to the reduction of congestion and the achievement of all of the oil consumption target and the GHG emission target, which are the other two big policy targets. In order to achieve this ambitious target, Quebec has put forward a new structuring project for public transit network, such as the Réseau Express Métropolitain REM in Montreal, the extension project for Montreal Subway Blue Line, and the BRT, which is another bus rapid transit in Montreal. In Quebec City, a structuring transportation network project centered on a new tramway is currently moving forward. There is also a major project going on in the city of Gatineau and Lévis. These are some of the projects that are currently approved and underway. Some other projects are still in the preliminary phase, such as the REM de l'Est, which is another project similar to the ones being built right now. This is a $10 billion project for the eastern part of Montreal Island. Extension project for the Montreal Subway Yellow Line, another structuring project for public transit networks in Montreal suburb and Quebec medium-sized cities. Overall, there is a lot of transit projects that are either being realized right now in Quebec or are on the analyzed for the future. Land use planning is also one of the key elements to achieve sustainable mobility goal by reducing distance traveled and motorized travel, and therefore GHG emission. In this regard, better integration of transportation and land use planning has become essential in order to ensure that municipal development and growth take into account the induced demand in transport. An important measure of the action plan initially planned for the development of a new program to fund municipality in order to realize integrated sustainable mobility plan to be incorporated incorporated into current planning tools. As of 2021, works have begun within Quebec government on a new urbanization and planning policy. As of September, very lately, there is talk to evolve the project into a legislative obligation under Quebec's Loi sur l'aménagement et l'urbanisme. One of the main levers of action in this aspect is the electrification of transportation. The 2030 plan for a green economy has set many targets in this regard, such as achieve carbon neutrality by 2050, have a 1.5 million electric vehicle on the road in Quebec by 2030, no sale of new gasoline-powered vehicle as of 2035. The law pertaining to this was just deposed at the Assemblée nationale this week. 55% of city buses and 65% of school buses electrified by 2030. 100% of governmental car, SUV, and van and minivan, and 25% of pickup truck electrified by 2030. The plan also renews several existing programs and introduce new ones in order to achieve this target. Programs that support the electrification of public transportation, support access to subsidized vehicles, and support the extension of the electrical charging station. Policy targets: sustainable mobility must also be at the services of economic development. The target regarding this aspect is aimed to make the Quebec ground transportation equipment industry a reference for its innovative solution in sustainable mobility and intelligent transportation, an industry with competitive company and creative workforce that contribute to Quebec's economic prosperity. It also aims to make optimal use of transport mode within logistics chain to enable companies to become more competitive on national and international markets. It aims to improve the fluidity of freight transport and thus increase the overall performance of the economy and businesses by making it easier and cheaper for them to ship. It aims to provide more options for sustainable and economic mobility, ultimately allowing more fluid traffic and thus reducing the proportion of household spending devoted to transportation. Main improvement regarding those aspects, and to achieve this, a theory of measure of improvement will contribute to an optimal utilization of all transportation mode and their interconnection, better integrated logistics chain, and efficient trade corridor. We support the transport industry with the labor shortage challenge to ensure the availability of workers in all spheres of transport, from driver to mechanics and other. A new program in this matter has been introduced by 2018. Adapt quickly to change with regulation that can answer innovation reality. For example, Quebec Code de la Sécurité routière has been updated to allow for autonomous vehicle pilot project. Support for the industrial sector of land transport equipment that will be achieved by supporting various projects, increasing the presence of companies in market outside Quebec, and strengthening research and innovation to become a world leader in this sector. And that was basically the main objective. New way of planning transportation was basically the main objective that guides the policy all the way through, and that will structure future action regarding sustainable mobility. Now, as a whole, the policy itself has set the main goal that to achieve the objective, some structural change needs to be made or put in place, and this includes changing way of doing things internally as a government. What the policy say is that we need to better plan transportation, and these structural action will be undertaken. As I said earlier, we want to put forward integrated sustainable mobility plan for the municipal sector. Mobility financing is also a major challenge. The government also launched a major workshop on mobility financing with the objective to identify new financing tools to enable mobility actors to fully assume their responsibility and to generate lasting financing solutions for transportation network. The workshop evaluated several funding tools in order to prepare for the predictable decrease in gas tax revenue associated with the growth of the electric vehicle fleet. Road usage charges and electrical recharge taxes are among the financial tools currently studied. Collection of evidence-based data in transport. Data is everything. In order to improve decision-making support, up-to-date data is essential for monitoring government intervention mobility. Currently, many data are obsolete or missing, and an evidence-based collection strategy would therefore be carried out in order to fill the gap. Three main projects will involve the completion of a national origin destination transportation survey for people to complete the survey that are done at the regional metropolitan area level. A national road freight survey and a collection of data focusing on other modes such as shipping and railroad and part of the transportation system. Winning condition. We believe that three winning conditions are essential to reach our objective: better governance, sustainable financing, and mobilization. The first one, governance, is aimed to stimulate exchange in order to foster flexible partnership between the government, the municipal sector, and civil society. A regional transportation planning defined and implemented by a local community will improve the safety and the overall mobility option for users. Government support can be provided for initiatives to bring transportation stakeholders together and expand partnership with the ultimate goal of adapting transportation services so that the citizens and businesses can easily access the service they need. Financing. The question of financing is crucial, as stated earlier. It's necessary to evaluate various economic tools available as well as their effect on the income and the demand in transport and make sure financing is sustainable for the year to come. The way in which this revenue will be used is also part of the equation. Also, the maintenance of existing transportation infrastructure remain a major issue for Quebec's economy. Lower carbon footprint mobility solutions should be prioritized when it comes to the development of mobility. Awareness and mobilization. Finally, to reach our target and objective, the partner needs to play an active role, and to do so, they need to be convinced of the advantage of a more sustainable mobility. Their mobilization is essential, and we are working with them to maintain their awareness and mobilization. Focus on sustainable mobility. Monitoring and accountability is an important part of the sustainable mobility policy implementation. The monitoring of both the 181 measure and main target are made 2 times a year for the measure and on an annual basis for the target. An annual report is published once a year. In order to engage partners, learn about emerging trends and challenges, and discuss implementation and outcome, an annual forum is held with the civil society partner. Context oblige, in 2021, the 2021 forum was held online and can be viewed through the Ministry of Transportation website. The impact of telework and of the pandemic on freight logistic chain were amongst the subjects discussed at this year's forum. As stated previously, a major set of the policy is the link with the stakeholder and civil society partner. In order to maintain this, the advisory committee that contributed to the development of the policy became the Policy Monitoring Committee when the policy was launched. The Policy Monitoring Committee consists of 25 representatives from different areas of sustainable mobility. An interdepartmental committee was also established to enable collaboration within government partners. Reaction to the pandemic. Well, as it was likely the same for most of you, the pandemic has had a significant impact on our activity and has been a game changer on many elements. We had to adjust quickly to the new reality, and it slowed a lot of action and measure that we have to deploy in order to implement our action plan. To give you just a few examples, in order to support various transportation sectors affected by the pandemic, several measures and financial assistance programs were deployed quickly during the last year. We have an assistance program for maintaining essential regional air services during the public health emergency, which was a 40 million program that was quickly put together. We had to put a financing program, emergency assistance program for public transit, which has a budget of $1.39 billion, just to make sure that the transit society have enough money to compensate for the loss of usage during the pandemic. And we had to fund rapidly a bus intercity transport emergency assistance program, which was $8.2 million. As of March 30th, 2021, we have, after 3 years of implementation, there was 151 measures that were completed or in progress, representing more than 83% of the overall measure. We have 33 measures that were completed. And we have a measure that are programmed to start within the last year of the action plan. As I said earlier, the pandemic impacted our activity and slowed deployment of the policy measure, and which also the policy bring us to a rapid change in our context. The pandemic situation considerably changed priority and led to quick and drastic transformation of transportation pattern, which we do not know yet to what extent they will be temporary or permanent. We had internal factor also that played a significant role. We had a change of government not long after the announce of the policy, and we have new commitments that have been issued that had the impact or related to sustainable mobility. However, the extensive collaborative approach used in developing the policy allowed us to identify key challenges and targets that remain relevant despite the evolving context. Social equity, access to mobility, lower environmental footprint, economic growth are all challenges that are still pertinent, that are still relevant in the context of the pandemic. So in order to adjust to these elements, we launched a review of the first action plan with the objective of taking into consideration the new governmental commitment, pandemic effect, and to shorten the number of actions and to try to raise effectiveness by putting forward action that have an increased and more direct impact on the policy main target. I'd like to say thank you again for inviting us and let you present our policy for this webinar. Like I said earlier, this policy is wide and cover a lot of aspects, and I had only a quick glimpse of it today. So I strongly recommend to visit our website in order to get more information about it. And I will be pleased to answer questions that you might have either within the discussion later or by email if you have some. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jean-Marc. That was a very exciting and ambitious plan. I like all the elements that you've pulled into it, and that you have like 5-year increment action plans to kind of make sure you're on target, and that you're adjusting that action plan based on the pandemic outcomes. That's really great. So I'm sure we'll get a bunch of questions for you in a little bit, but we'll keep going with the presenters for now. So our next presentation will be about CleanBC and active transportation from the BC Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure. And let me just make her a presenter. So that will be presented by Kate Berniaz, project lead for climate active transportation in the programs and corporate initiatives for BC Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure. I hope I said your last name right, Kate.
Yes, you did.
Yeah,
Thank
okay,
you.
Great.
Here, I'll just set up my
slides. Yeah, great.
screen. There we go.
Yeah, they look good.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And following Quebec, it's a hard act to follow there, but I'll give you an overview of what we're doing out on the coast in terms of clean transportation and our climate initiatives, and then highlighting a couple of our projects. But I want to start with acknowledging the land that I speak with you today, which is the traditional and unceded territories of the Lekwungen speaking people, known today as the Esquimalt and Songhees. And as you would know, Victoria, calling you from Victoria, BC. And the Lekwungen means the place of the smoke herring. So today I'll talk to you about CleanBC, our climate action plan, and how we're using climate action in our transportation system. Then talk about active transportation, and finally one of our programs that supports zero emission vehicles driving across our province. So CleanBC was launched in 2018, and we have a goal to reduce our GHG emissions by 80% by 2050. And we had an election last year, and every minister's mandate letter, so what they need to achieve within their term, includes references to CleanBC and how it's a responsibility for all ministries. But one of the things that we found within the 2050 goal, we also have 2040 and 2030 goals, and we're not meeting our 2030 goals at this point. So the roadmap to 2030 is underway to look at what further moves and policies and programs need to be put in place to meet our GHG emission reduction targets. And us as the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure, we work closely with the Climate Action Secretariat, which is in the Ministry of Environment, the Ministry of Energy, Mines and Low Carbon Innovation, and the Ministry of Municipal Affairs. So they're good partners throughout this work. So as I said, we're developing a roadmap to 2030 across government, being led by the Ministry of Environment, and that's going to be released at COP 26 at later this year. And so when we look at transportation, which is our biggest emitter for GHG emissions, our approach that we're taking is looking at all the different ways that we can reduce GHG emissions, and especially looking at that efficiency first approach. So how can we reduce the distance traveled, increase mode shift, and improve vehicle efficiency, as well as, and then secondarily, the approach to adopt zero emission vehicles and use cleaner fuels. And so in the past, we've done a lot of work and been really successful in terms of our zero emission vehicle policies and incentives and our clean fuel standards. There's more work to be done on those first three components of an approach to climate action in transportation. So one of our approaches is the active transportation and the active transportation strategy. So BC's first active transportation strategy was released in 2019 with two key goals. One is to double the percentage of trips taken by active transportation by 2030. And the other is to support Vision Zero, the vision of having zero fatalities or serious injuries on our roads. So to undertake, when this survey was released, we didn't have a good understanding of how people across BC were using active transportation, other than using the Canadian Census commute to work data. And so we undertook a general population survey on how people traveled to key destinations, including work and school. And so this pre-COVID baseline provided travel mode share as well as perceptions about transportation from all across the province. So we surveyed 3,800 residents in November and December of 2019. And what we found was, in terms of the primary mode that people use, 33% of school-age children primarily use active transportation to and from school. And for adults, approximately 9% use active transportation to get to those key destinations, work, school, and community activities. But we also want to understand that primary mode only captures those people who are using active transportation for a majority of their trips to work or school. But what we also asked was, how much travel time do you use active transportation throughout the last year? And so we wanted to capture that seasonality of active transportation use, as well as that occasional use that is really important in terms of meeting our goal. And so we found that 67% of British Columbians used active transportation occasionally, less than 50% of their travel time, but still were walking and biking to some of their destinations. And that's the population that we really want to grow to meet our needs, to meet our goals. So to support active transportation, we have a range of strategies that we use, including more specific action plans. We partner extensively with other ministries, as well as with nonprofit organizations. We're working on community planning, as the Jean-Marc's presentation talked about. The integration of land use planning and transportation is essential. And so we work closely with our integrated transportation branch as well as the Ministry of Municipal Affairs. We provide financial support, and I'll talk more about the grants that we provide as well as incentives for things like e-bikes. Looking at legislation and regulation, especially our Motor Vehicle Act, as well as increasing awareness and supporting asset management related to the long-term sustainability of our transportation system, especially the infrastructure. So one of the approaches is the active transportation programs that we support. And those include Everyone Rides grade 4-5. So that's school-age education that we're piloting in some urban centers across BC, as well as an online education system that was program that was developed at the start of the pandemic. We're supporting school travel planning, so having schools participate in planning and programming to encourage kids to be able to walk and bike to school safely. For many, many years, over a decade, we've been supporting Bike to Work Week, which is been a really successful encouragement and education campaign that's in person and online in the spring and the fall. And that attracts new riders every year and takes place in communities across the province. So with that, since the pandemic, this Bike to Work Week has shifted to be Go by Bike Week. So acknowledging that there's a lot of other trips that people can take by bike other than commuting to work. And then Zero Vision grants. So working with the Ministry of Health to support small grants that improve road safety following the Vision Zero principles. So our BC Active Transportation Grant Program is a very successful cost share program where we partner with Indigenous and local governments to support network planning and infrastructure development for active transportation. This is also a long-running grant program, but in the last couple of years has been expanded from focusing just on cycling to focusing on all parts of active transportation. And also in the last 2 years had more of a focus on those Indigenous and small communities that need extra help in developing their active transportation networks. So we know that our urban centers, Vancouver and Victoria, are very successful in building active transportation networks, but we see the same need and interest from small communities, but don't have the financial capacity. So we support them by first helping with planning, network planning, where they can identify where they want to improve active transportation infrastructure, and then they can apply for infrastructure grants. So with the infrastructure, we also produced the Active Transportation Design Guide in 2019, and that provides the best practices for active transportation infrastructure for walking, cycling, multi-use paths, to really help everyone be on the same page in terms of what's expected when building high quality active transportation infrastructure that can attract new riders and a diversity of riders from diversity of people of all ages and abilities to walk and cycle to local destinations. So this is a free guide online, and you can download all 576 pages or a section that relates to work that you're doing, and I recommend that you check it out. So then switching paths to other sustainable transportation that we support is our EV charging station network. So the Ministry of Transportation works with other ministries, BC Hydro and Fortis, which are our energy providers, to create a province-wide network of EV charging stations. And so this map shows how we as the ministry is supporting that network, which is, well, Ministry of Energy and Mines and Low Carbon Innovation, as well as BC Hydro and Fortis, provide EV charging stations in communities. We're responsible for connecting the gaps between communities, and with such a big province, there are a lot of open spaces in between those communities, and so we're building active transportation. Switching gears, EV charging stations in rest stops across the province. And as you can see in this map, we're in each of these places, we are providing more than one charging station, so that we know that if something breaks down, we need to provide enough charging ports to ensure that people can get on their way and get to their destination. So we currently have 22 charging places across the province, and we're building more each year. At this point, about 4 or 5. And now we're mainly focused on the north of the province, so north of Williams Lake and especially Prince George. So people can feel comfortable buying EVs in any part of the province and being able to get to their destination. Also, to inform that work, we're undertaking a 5-year plan to better understand where these stations need to go, but also what technology is available, because many of these stations locations don't have power or Wi-Fi connections, so we need to find alternatives to be able to charge EVs in those areas. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer questions during the roundtable, but also here's my email and links to both our CleanBC plan and the active transportation strategy. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Kate. That's super interesting to hear all the work you're doing with AT and EVs in particular. Yeah, I'm really curious to check out that design guide. I'm sure you're going to have lots of questions when we get to the panel discussion. So our next presentation has a couple different speakers. It's the Cycling in Ontario, which will be presented by different staff members from the Ontario Ministry of Transportation. So I believe we're beginning with Mike Kanzi, the policy advisor for the User Policy Office. And then there's also a speaker, and I'll let you pass the torch to the next speaker, and you can keep doing that. But there is someone from their Design and Contract Standards Office, and then their Public Outreach and Education Office as well. So I'll hand it over to you, Mike. Let me share my screen here so I can get your slides up.
Thanks, Natalie. While you're doing that, I'll just warn everyone, if at some point I say the word MTO, that is just an acronym for Ontario Ministry of Transportation. So moving on to the next slide, which, do I have control of this, Natalie?
I think you'll have to tell me when to switch, I believe.
Right. Okay.
So there's just a bit of a delay, sorry.
No worries. So Cycle On, Ontario's cycling strategy, was released in August of 2013 as a 20-year all-of-government strategy to encourage the growth of cycling and improve the safety of people cycling. And it was an all-of-government strategy in the sense that the action items were to be implemented not just by the Ministry of Transportation, but by several other ministries and agencies of the provincial government. Now, the strategy had 5 strategic directions, which are on the screen in front of you. And underneath each one of those strategic directions were areas for action. But the strategy itself was pretty high level, not very detailed. And the idea was that we would implement the cycling strategy through a series of multi-year action plans that are more detailed. The first action plan was released in April of 2014, and the second one in 2018. Next slide, please. So what I'm going to do, there were so many initiatives that were undertaken as a result of this cycling strategy and the action plans that I really couldn't go into all of them. So I will talk about a few that the Ministry of Transportation was responsible for, first at a high level, and then I'll drill down into the details on some of these initiatives. So starting off with the Ontario Municipal Cycling Infrastructure Program. This was the first ever provincial grant program supporting municipalities to build cycling infrastructure. And the allocations were announced in 2016. We had a budget of $10 million. It was allocated to 37 different municipalities for a variety of cost-shared projects. At the same time, more or less, we were implementing something called the Cycling Training Fund. It had a budget of $380,000, and those funds were allocated to a variety of organizations, including municipalities, school boards, advocacy groups, etc. Those two programs were similar in that they were application-based and competitive. The next program I'm going to talk about, the Ontario Municipal Commuter Cycling Program, was different. It was funded with the proceeds of a greenhouse gas cap and trade program. And so its focus really was reduction of emissions, GHG emissions. So it had a budget of $94.5 million, which was ultimately allocated to 117 municipalities, again for cost shared projects. Most of the money went into, was dedicated to infrastructure projects, but smaller municipalities were also able to apply for funding to develop active transportation plans. And I think the one other thing I'll mention here is that, no, I'm gonna leave that to Aaron, who will talk about it a little bit later. The next project, the province-wide cycling network, I will also leave that to the next speaker, Kyle, who can go into the details about that. Ontario Traffic Manual Book 18. It is a guidelines document for municipalities to use when planning, designing, and operating cycling infrastructure. The first edition came out in 2013 or 2014, and the new edition was released just last month. It's the biggest change between this second edition of Book 18 and the first edition is that this new edition has a much stronger focus on all ages and abilities. So it recommends physically separated bike lanes at lower volumes and speeds of traffic than was the case in the past. And shifting gears, Making Ontario Roads Safer Act, that was passed in 2015. It was a wide-ranging bit of legislation, but it included quite a few aspects that were related to cycling. So for example, increased fines for dooring, and a requirement was added to the Highway Traffic Act, specifying a minimum distance required when passing cyclists. And then the final thing I'll talk about at this high level, internal MTO policy changed for provincial highway projects, and it is now to consider cycling infrastructure on all highway capital projects where it makes sense to do so. Next slide, please. So I'm going to go into a little bit of detail about the three grant programs, just to talk about some of the specific projects or types of projects that were supported. The Ontario Municipal Cycling Infrastructure Program, the City of Brampton and the Town of Caledon, which are adjacent municipalities, they applied separately for two different projects to make improvements to a trail, an off-road trail. Even though they were only providing 3 kilometers of improvements, those improvements closed gaps in the trail and created what became a 17-kilometer long route. The City of Newmarket was another exceptional project, I thought. Their proposal was for 5 kilometers of different kinds of cycling infrastructure connecting residential neighborhoods on either side of the downtown, as well as connecting them all to a commuter bus terminal. The Cycling Training Fund, some of the funding was provided to provide cycle skills training for adults through the CAN Bike 2 course. And that training in CAN Bike 2 is a prerequisite to eventually training as a CAN Bike cycling instructor. And that was the intent behind many of those applications. They were intended to develop more cycling instructors. Another interesting couple of projects funded through the Cycling Training Fund, two different advocacy groups were consulting on and developing improvements to the CAN Bike curricula. Finally, the Ontario Municipal Commuter Cycling Program, because it had such a large budget, some signature projects could be pursued. So, for example, the City of Ottawa constructed a new active transportation bridge over the Rideau Canal, and the City of Toronto received approval to install up to 300 new bike share stations with up to 6,000 docks and 3,000 new bikes. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Kyle, who can discuss the province-wide cycling network.
Thank you, Michael. So my name is Kyle Perdue. I'm from the Ontario Ministry of Transportation. I work in the Standards and Contract branch in the Highway Design Office. My specific role is a design and contract standards engineer, where I manage the climate change and active transportation portfolio. So I'll be talking about the latter right here. So thank you for the opportunity to speak. Appreciate hearing all the different plans across the country and the provinces that are represented here today. I'll be going over the Ontario province-wide cycling network. I'll explain how it was developed and the progress made to date thus far. So the MTO released a plan for the province-wide cycling network routes in April of 2018. The network is to include approximately 3,150 kilometers of routes on MTO-owned provincial highways, so on the provincial government-owned highways, and an additional 6,700 kilometers on non-MTO infrastructure. That would be municipalities and regions. So the network was identified through consultation and analysis conducted by a consulting firm, WSP. And some of the highlights of how we got to that point: in the summer of 2016, municipalities, Indigenous communities, key stakeholders were invited to submit data via online survey, which included proposed routes for provincial scale cycling network. The proposed routes were evaluated against criteria such as connectivity to amenities and other routes, and safety for both for motor vehicles, and then comparing with the truck volumes. Then the draft concept for the network was developed. In November of 2016, 8 regional engagement sessions across Ontario to seek technical feedback on route options were held. The draft network was developed and posted for public consultation on what was known as the Environmental Registry, and it was up for a period, I have here April 12th to May 27th in 2017. The MTO reviewed hundreds of revisions proposed before releasing its final plan. Next slide, please. Okay, thank you very much. So at the time of the plan's release, almost 50% of the network was already in operation, as a large number of unconnected, mostly municipal cycling routes. So the idea of this provincial-wide cycling network is to create like a continuous network. Just what it had existed originally was just fragmented pieces. Since the plan's release, the Ontario Ministry of Transportation has already installed 1,500 kilometers of active transportation facility on its owned facilities, like on our Ontario owned facilities, and an additional 400 kilometers is expected to be completed by the end of this fiscal year. Our fiscal year goes up until April of 2022, but construction season's starting to wind down, and it's just based on the weather. So an additional 400 kilometers is expected by the end of the fiscal year. And that actually does it for my portion, and I'll pass it off to the next speaker. You can go to the next slide, please.
So, hi, my name is Melanie Trottier. I'm a regional strategic coordinator with the Public Outreach and Education Office at the Ministry of Transportation. So, our office promotes not only legislative and policy changes to the people of Ontario, but also the best practice and safe behavior using a social marketing approach. So, in this case, it was related to cycling in support of this Cycle On strategy and the action plans. So the way we work, our team is geographically dispersed across the province to work most effectively at the community level on road safety issue that affects people where they live, work, and play. So this is also allows each strategic coordinator to create and leverage local partnership and create messaging that reflects local cycling culture. For instance, cycling on rural roads of Blue Mountain and Collingwood is very different experience than daily commuting by bike in urban center like downtown Toronto. So while the same laws and legislation apply, the challenges and conditions cyclists and driver face are very different. So it is important to ensure our messages were adapted correctly to both local realities and the specific audience. So our office approach is largely based on collaboration with local, regional, and provincial road safety partners. So this includes supporting active and safe routes to schools organization, provincial and law enforcement, as well as local police services, public health, trauma hospitals, newcomers groups, and municipal officials. So throughout, as Ontario communities were encouraged to, through the Cycle On strategy, to build more cycling infrastructure. Our team updated all like the digital printed materials such as the Cycling Skills Guide and the Young Cyclist Guide to include messages on how to safely use bike boxes, share roads, and all the best practice around like pedestrian crossovers and roundabouts, for instance. So we continued to work with stakeholders to get the knowledge and cycling safety messages out to the public through community outreach activities. Our team developed digital materials to easily explain legislation and regulatory changes, such as the 1 meter law that Mike referred to our partners, and promote safe riding practices, rules of the road, proper use of the newest infrastructures to both cyclists and motorists, because this was new to the environment. So we have supported local community groups in the development of awareness and education campaigns and outreach events through our own public education grant options and sharing of educational and promotional material and various partnership throughout the Cycle On strategy. So we partner with local groups who share our interest for safe transportation, develop campaigns and outreach events that have the potential to change road user behavior. We continuously share the most up-to-date data from our Ontario road safety report, annual report. So, and evidence-based messages with our partners and stakeholders. And we measure the change in cyclists and drivers' attitude and behavior through a biennial survey. So with the launch of the Cycle On strategy in 2013, we have enhanced this survey to include a series of questions related to drivers' perception of cyclists and cyclist behaviors. While the 2021 results show that there is an increasing number of Ontarians who consider, for example, that riding without a helmet is very dangerous. There is also signs of increasing issues such as distraction while cycling or during incidents. So the survey allows us to also identify upcoming issues. So in 2021, drivers are more accepting of cyclists on the road compared to 2015 when we started. That being said, there is still room for improvement. And this is why we continue to our public outreach and education efforts. So that kind of, sum up a little bit of what our office has supported the Cycle On strategy. So with that, I will pass it back to Michael. Are you taking back this one for the next slide?
Oh, actually, it's going to Erin Desso next.
Hi, everybody. My name is Erin Desso, and I am a team lead with the User Policy Office here at Ontario's MTO. I work closely with Mike and also the other folks on the line. So as Mike mentioned at the onset, we're currently wrapping up some of the initiatives from Cycle On, and some have already been completed. So Kyle spoke about the cycling network, which is still ongoing. And our Ontario Municipal Community Recycling Program, because of the pandemic, many municipalities were able to get an extension until the end of 2021. And so we're still receiving reports about the investments the province has made, but expecting that to continue until the end of the calendar year. And finally, the completed initiative, again, Mike mentioned, Ontario Shopping Manual Book 18 is now available online. Just a couple of other initiatives we wanted to flag briefly. We're working on a number of components of active transportation and other things that are related to active transportation around e-scooters, e-bikes, cargo e-bikes. So for here, the example, cargo e-bikes pilot, allowing municipalities to permit bylaws to have bylaws permitting vehicles that don't meet the e-bike definition within their jurisdiction, to see how they integrate with other traffic. And most recently, our motor vehicle collision report, which is what police use to take down information when there's any kind of collision that's reportable in the province. We made legislative changes so that during incidents, so when a cyclist hits a parked car or a parked car hits a cyclist, depending on who's opening what doors when, will now be tracked starting in January 2022. So while the Cycle On strategy is winding down, there are still many initiatives ongoing and future work to come. So thank you. And with that, I will turn things back over to Natalie.
Okay, thanks so much, Erin, and the entire MTO team. That was very interesting. I love how we went from a high-level policy with Jean-Marc's presentation and then further down into the details with the delivery and implementation specific to some of the programs that you had. So I'll now ask if all of the speakers can maybe turn their cameras on, and we'll start the panel discussion. I don't see any comments entered into the chat quite yet. So if anyone has any questions for the panel members, please feel free to type it into the chat, or you can unmute and ask your question directly. So while we wait for people to enter their comments, I did have a couple myself. One of the questions I had was, how do you determine as provincial agencies how to split your support for the urban centers versus the rural municipalities or regions? Is it strictly population-based or just based on need? How do you determine that?
I can start, Natalie. Here in BC, we've had, for many years, I think we supported our urban centers more, and then in the last couple of years have now have much more focus outside those urban centers, and really we're catching up to the urban centers. They have large numbers of staff and funding, and so where we as a province see the value that we can provide is really outside of the Lower Mainland and Southern Vancouver Island, because that's where there may not be the staff capacity or funding, and that we can help more. So even though we recognize that isn't the biggest bang for our buck in terms of meeting our mode share goals, it's still vitally important that people across the province have access to transportation choices. Thanks.
I can talk about a couple of the grant programs. So the first grant program, the Ontario Municipal Cycling Infrastructure Program, was quite a while ago, but it had a very complex set of criteria that we were scoring applications against. And I'm sure that there were points for being a small municipality or being in a remote region. The details I forget, except I can say that all 5 MTO regions had projects in them. And the 5 regions include Northwestern Ontario, which has like less than 1/10 of the population of the province. The second grant program, the one that was funded with the proceeds of GHG cap and trade, the funding in that case was allocated based on a mathematical formula. And it wasn't competitive in the way that the other grant program was. Any municipality that expressed an interest and provided the necessary information was allocated funds. And the mathematical formula considered 2 things: population of the municipality as a percentage of all the population involved, and then the existing number of cycling commuters in the municipality, according to the census, as a percentage of all the municipalities involved. And so in that second program, a lot of small, in fact, one municipality with less than 1,000 residents was allocated funds.
If I can take the next, we have a lot of program within the Quebec Sustainable Mobility Policy, but the trend in the Quebec government financial aid program is to move to call for proposal program. So the criteria laid out at the first program, and then it's open for most of the municipality or other recipient from the financial aid, depending on the kind of program. And then if they they do a proposal and meet the criteria, the proposal are ranked regarding the one that do respect more of the criteria, and that's the way the funding is allocated in most of the program. We also have some programs that are financial basis program, like program that help the transit system or the stuff that have different criteria because they transmit funding on a yearly basis, and then the criteria depend on which organization is entitled to the financing and what are their activity and what level of financing they could get regarding that. But for most programs, for example, for a program to sustain the development of active transportation, usually it is a call for proposal based program, and we have different call for proposal depending on the renewal of the funding envelope. So a year it might be certain regions that get more and other regions get some other year depending on the quality of the proposal.
Okay. Someone asked here, what do you think will be the biggest hurdle you will have to get over?
I would like to take a stab at that one.
Sure.
What's interesting about being the provincial government working on active transportation, and I wonder if my colleagues in other provinces have the same struggle, is most active transportation infrastructure and rides take place on municipal owned roads. So people aren't traveling across long stretches of highway from one city to another, typically on a bicycle or by foot. And so where the role of the province and the role of the municipality work together is definitely a challenge in terms of ensuring that something at the provincial level works for all of these different municipalities. And the issue around diverse geography and rural and urban is definitely something that people are speaking about across provinces. But it's you don't want to set a one approach that's going to be dictated from the province to all municipalities. But there is a role for the province to play. So how do you balance that? Leaving room for municipalities to do what makes sense for them, and also providing the support and the guidance that allows them to do so with safety and convenience in mind.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Erin, that the interplay between municipal roads and provincial roads, and also looking at our provincial roads that run through municipalities, and how do we balance the ministries and the government priorities around goods movement and car movement, basically, to the increased interest from communities to have that road that runs through the town be more of a complete street. And during the pandemic, we've also had towns request that they want to have speed limit reductions, they want to have patios on our provincial highway that runs through their town, and we're not in a position, we're not set up for that because of our priorities around goods movement, and especially as well. I think the other challenge is just funding, and that when you're for us doing, especially since 2019, and increasing our role in active transportation, especially, that you can, that it takes a while to ramp up and to get programs going and to get infrastructure projects planned and designed, and all of that takes funding, but it also takes ramping up of funding, and so that is, we continue to work on in terms of if this is a government priority, we need financial and staff support to get there. Thanks.
And the other big hurdle, and I say this from the perspective of someone who's worked on this file since 2009, is really political support. So the cycling strategy came about because of a minister that was really enthusiastic and a premier that was really enthusiastic. And I can say that prior to that minister and premier taking office, we were working on a policy, but it was much less ambitious just because there was less interest. And so any jurisdiction where you have a politician that's interested, that helps a lot.
Yeah, that will definitely be a challenge for us here in Saskatchewan. Getting that support for non-fuel based transportation. I'll put it that way. Jean-Marc, did you have something to add there? Yeah.
Yes, I have a couple hurdles to add to those, and I agree with the hurdle that was mentioned previously. Transportation in Quebec, as it is, I guess, in every other jurisdiction, is a shared responsibility with municipality. So sometimes it's not easy to move in the same direction. Sometimes the movement is in the same general direction, but the finalities need more discussion and diplomacy in order to get it going. In Quebec, we have over 1,000 municipalities, and in the law of big numbers, we have some of them that are very eager to move forward in the same direction as we do, and some that we have to pull and push a little bit more in order to make them adhere to the big goals. So that's a major hurdle. And political endorsement is also a major challenges. And it varies according to political cycles. So when you're in a big governmental wide policy, you have phases where you're very in sync with the governmental objectives. Sometimes when you're a little bit out of sync, and you have to make sure that the synchronicity is kept going and aligned, and you have to resell a lot of time the advantages of your policy in order to to get the political support you need to move forward on issue. And sometimes we have the authorities that get really unhappy about the result not going as fast as we said we were go, especially when we have public reporting on the target and objective. But at the same time, they might be slowing down the deployment of the action or the measure for many goods or different reasons. So we have to deal with that unsynchronicity. And the other thing, which is a major hurdle here, is I would say the bureaucracy that's involved in some of the action. We do in Quebec here have a big advantage with the Green Fund, which is now the Electrification and Climate Change Fund, which provide a lot of money for a lot of measure regarding electrification and active transportation and other. But at the same time, we have to compute every GHG gain we do with every dollar we spend on those programs. Sometimes it takes months or years to get a funding program going through because we have to modelize the GHG gain we will get for that funding program. And for some program, even though rule of thumb, we know they're good program in order to reduce GHG emission and move towards sustainable mobility, we're just a nightmare to compute the GHG reduction, and we get more report and monitoring to do than the actual aid we provide in those programs. So this sometimes is more of an impeachment than an easy way to move forward. So that's part of the difficulty we are encountering.
Oh, those are great points. All right, there's another question about what does a highway cycling network look like? But I think, Shaliza, I think you meant more of this highway cycling facility, because she's asking if it's a certain width of a highway shoulder or is it a separate piece of infrastructure. So I don't know if Kyle or BC Design Guide maybe have some information there. I think specifically on provincial facilities as well, provincial highways.
Well, I can speak to that. I can at least start. So our cycling network comes in many different shapes and forms. So we actually have, for provincially owned infrastructure, we use our bikeway design manual. And then for municipally owned and regionally owned infrastructure, we use Book 18. And there's guidelines, and we lay out like different types of facilities, widths. We have to look at the truck volume, and there's a number of graphs and nomographs, and we use all that information to show what facilities could be suitable in certain locations. Now, for our King's Highway, we're not having too many bike lanes right up against some of our busier highways, but we would have crossings at interchanges. So they really come in all different shapes and sizes, and it's based on truck volume, or sorry, speed and volumes are main determining factors. If something can be on a shoulder, or if it should be a separated facility, or if it's much higher speeds and volumes, you might just have to relocate it off of our right of way. So I hope, does that help? Just as a general overview. I could give a whole presentation on just how we choose those, but I try to keep it pretty high level.
Yeah, maybe a presentation for another time. That sounds interesting. I know, Kate, too, with your design guide, I'm sure 500 and some pages, right?
Yes, we have a chapter on provincial highways, and similar to what Kyle said about the facility design selection based on speed and volume. So for the most part, that speaks to wider shoulders, but does include separated facilities, usually multi-use paths. And we're getting more and more support and pushback from communities to include parallel separated routes when we're doing things like widening Highway 1 outside of Vancouver and other major projects that were moving people. Well, in the Highway 1 case, cycling wasn't allowed on that highway before, and so now with this widening, people asking for a route that will allow them to go between those communities off of the highway. And so we're seeing that more and more in the projects that we're building, and there's an expectation that to attract new people to cycling, we need to take people off of the highways.
Yeah, that kind of answered my next question. I was going to ask if cycling was restricted on some of your highway facilities, because I know in Saskatchewan, I don't know if they're restricted or not, but we have some very confident cyclists that I see on some of our 110 km/h posted highways. And I don't know, they must be very confident to be on that facility. I would not feel comfortable being passed by a semi going that speed, but yeah, do any of you restrict that type of cycling on those highways?
Of course, in our GTA, we have like the 401 is at 1.14 lanes, so there's no way we're putting cyclists anywhere near a highway like that. But in some of our more, like, I don't know, our rural highways, the speeds can get up pretty high, like posted at 80, and some of the vehicles are going even faster than that. Just depending on how much clearance there is, we may be able to allow it in certain circumstances. Like there are, like, you could put up barriers if you have to and just have some separation. So again, it all kind of comes down to what the dimensions are and the truck volumes and all those criteria. So it's not just a simple answer. There's quite a few components to it, but there's absolutely some of our highways that they are not permitted on under any circumstance.
Yeah, and that's the same for us. We have some restricted highways, and also some facilities, like we have a tunnel underneath a waterway in Vancouver that currently is restricted. Cyclists are restricted, so we have a shuttle that goes back and forth. But as that tunnel is rebuilt, it's going to have cycling facilities. So it's, as we're building new facilities or replacing facilities, making them more accessible for people walking and cycling.
Same thing here in Quebec. The cycling is illegal on the divided line highways, so what we call in French autoroute, but it's permitted on the provincial roads, so like single lane highways, it's permitted.
That's great. I'm not seeing any more questions come in. We only have a couple minutes left. Another question I was wondering was a little bit more about the CanBike program that you mentioned, Mike. Is that just an education program for school children, adults?
CanBike is the sort of the brand name of a series of cycling skills courses that are offered. The brand name is owned by Canadian Cycling Association, which is primarily a racing organization, but they own this brand name and they train instructors to provide training to children and adults. So the adults course used to be called CanBike 2. I don't know if it still is, but there are courses for different age groups and different skill levels. And it's nationwide, although I think that in BC, for example, there's a course called, it used to be the Bike to Work Week Society course, which I think is more commonplace. And
yeah,
so
I think
go ahead.
Sorry, Mike.
All yours.
I think what our organizations in BC have done have taken the CanBike, a lot of that education material, and customized it. And as you asked in the comments about the Everyone Rides program, that's another example of taking that same education material from CanBike and slightly modifying it for a BC setting, and how you can teach those skills in a classroom as well as on bike within the school. So the Everyone Rides is students getting an hour to an hour and a half of in-class education, theoretical education about rules of the road and safety, and then going onto a bike for about an hour to practice and gain skills to cycle. And so currently we're we're doing it in 3 communities, and then we hope eventually this will become a universal program that every grade 4 and 5 student will be able to take to gain understanding of the rules of the road, as well as gaining those skills and confidence.
Does it happen during regular school hours? Is it part of the curriculum?
It's not part of the curriculum, but it does take place during school hours. Our curriculum is very wide open. There's a lot of ways to meet the goals and objectives of the education curriculum. So it is going to each school and providing it as an opportunity, but eventually, yes, our goal would be to be putting it into the curriculum.
Sounds great. So it looks like that's all the time we have for today. I want to thank you all so much for your wonderful presentations. It was great hearing about all this all the great programs that other provinces are rolling out and implementing. And thanks so much for taking the time to